I believe there is yet a word from the Lord for us today. Let us bow our heads. Gracious and mighty God, we are coming to you with our hearts panting after your presence, with our ears waiting to tingle with a word from you. Ask that the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. So, for those of you who have not heard me preach before, I am deeply Baptist. So, I was born and raised in a Southern Black Baptist church, so you probably hear a lot of that come out today, including maybe an alliteration or two, and definitely 3 points before I take us home. That said, I won't be before you long. And we'll be speaking from the subject, what have you heard? So I'm going to take us back to the first 2 verses in chapter 3 of 1 Samuel that tell us that young Samuel, we're not told how old he is at this point, was in the service of the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. Prophecy was not widespread. One day, Eli was asleep in his usual place, and his eyes had begun to fail, and he could barely see. This is important to provide us a little bit of context of where we're meeting Samuel and who Samuel is. So, again, we don't know how old Samuel was, but he was a child, because if you go back to chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, his mother prayed for him, cried out to God, and then gave that baby back to the priesthood. So he's been living in the temple, working under the priests since he was born, right? Now, what we get in 1 Samuel is following the trajectory of the judges and the prophets in the Old Testament. Because before there was a king, everything was run by God's chosen, which were the judges and then the prophets. But prophets also meant something different with Eli and then Samuel than they do when we get to the named prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, etc. And at this time, Israel had been asking for a king. They will have been asking for a king, but we're not there yet. Before we get there, we get to a very interesting fact that is at play, is that prophecy was not a norm in the time period, that people didn't just go around hearing from God. And the priests were the intercessors, the intermediaries between God and the people. Now, Samuel at the time was sleeping in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant was the literal place where the Spirit of God was held. And the only people who could access that were the priests. At the same time, Eli is old. His 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are working under him. And at this point, they're running amok. They're bringing shame, dishonor on the family name, because they're out here swindling the people, taking parts of the offerings that are supposed to be burnt for God before they even get there. And God has told Eli, you better get them together. And Eli says, I'm trying. So this is important because we need context before we start talking about a young Samuel hearing God. We got to know that corruption is precipitating, foregrounding Samuel's call by the Lord. because God said we got to tidy up the house. And to use a very old phrase, because, again, I have good Southern upbringing, God was like, we got to sweep around our own front door. And so a young Samuel, in my mind's eye, I'd say he's probably 13, 14. He's a teenager, right? Don't know nothing about nothing, really. So he's sleeping in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and he hears a voice. But because nobody's hearing from God like that, even the priests, and he's young, so he don't expect to hear from God yet. He's not been confirmed in his priestliness. He's an intern, right? And so he thinks, oh, well, my master's calling me. And also, it's the middle of the night because the lamps are burning. The lamps of God are burnt through the night until daybreak. So let's just say this was that 2, 3 o'clock hour in the morning. I know I get woken up a lot around 2, 3 in the morning. I know a lot of people do. And people say that's the witching hour. That's when the veil is thin, right? And so Samuel hears this voice, goes to Eli, and he goes, did you call me? Eli, also old, blind. He's like, please go back to sleep. I ain't call you, Linda. And so he goes back. He goes back in front of the Ark of the Covenant to the very presence of God that he doesn't realize that he's in. And God calls again. But because, again, people ain't used to hearing from God, Samuel's expecting whatever is calling him to be from outside of him. And so he goes back and he says, Master, I'm here. What do you need? And Eli again goes, go to bed. I'm not calling you. But because Eli's been at this, by the third time that this happened, he's like, oh, I think I know what's going on here. And tells Samuel, go back to bed. If you're called again, you need to respond. Something's calling you, and it's waiting for you to answer. And so he is being invited into this deep relationship with God that it even takes a minute for his mentor to realize is developing. Because frequently when we're doing the job becomes the job. You got a routine, you know what you're supposed to know, you do what you got to do. But sometimes something a little unexplained happens, and it makes you take a step back. And even Eli goes, oh, the thing that is calling you is not coming from outside of you. It's coming from inside. The call is coming from inside the house. Oh, all right. And so what God is doing and telling Samuel then is that, which we get as scripture a little later, behold, I'm doing a new thing. What he says to Samuel, like, I'm doing something in Israel. You know about it because you're at the center of it. And when it comes down, it's going to make everybody's ears tingle, not just yours, right? So even his experience of his spiritual ears being on fire for the Lord is something that is going to end up impacting the whole community, right? And so one of the things that I picked up from this is that God calls out to Samuel in silence. God calls out to Samuel in this soft place, this tender place where nothing's really going on. And it made me think, because if you all don't know this about preachers, preachers work their salt. The week of the sermon, they're going through it. Listen, they're going through it because you have to live the word, right? And so this week, as I was going through it in preparation for the sermon and thinking about silence and being invited into stillness, my brain was really, really noisy. And it made me think how often we are looking for answers outside of ourselves. And with the cacophony and the distractions all around us that obscure that we are actually hearing the call come from inside the house, right? We're looking on the outside for what's already on the inside. And even, this is even before we rush our way through the New Testament and how God connects with us. That even at this point, Samuel is helping us see that God is always and already calling to us, but it's never outside of ourselves. It's always starting within ourselves, right? And the things outside of ourselves usually are just enough to affirm what's already there. Eli still had a job to do, even though he already knew he was on his way out. The boys had made sure of that. He knew whatever's coming down from God from here, well, it's up. That's above me now, right? But God is calling you. I'm not calling you. You've got to go sit in that place. Go back to sleep. Go back to that soft place. Go back to the stillness. Go back to silence. And when the voice comes, because Eli also affirmed that it's going to come again, right? So even when we don't want to hear it, even when things are too loud on the outside of us, the voice will persist because there's something there for us in an appointed time. But we got to get still. We got to go back to the quiet place, right? And so God doesn't change up. God doesn't change up the method. Same thing every time. He calls us by name, right? That when we are called, and we think about call and purpose and all of these things in our society, it's a big thing. Like, what is your purpose? What are you doing in life? That those things, even if the affirmation of it is an external validation, it always comes from the inside first. I've been thinking a lot about my younger self, right? There was in my blogger days when I was like 15, 16, very angsty, very fraught on the internet, right? Very millennial. I had a phrase that said I wanted to bring more beauty, kindness, and meaning to the world. She was really on to something. And as of late, as things are shifting, as we are in the midst of so many distractions, so much hurt, so many wrongdoings, there's just a lot of evil that clouds our ability to see God through it. That I have been going back to that small voice that was actually my own, that said, why are you here? What is it that sets your soul on fire consistently? Bringing beauty, kindness, and meaning to the world. Very short phrase that was always calling me from inside. Very much led by God. God's voice in this random phrase that I came up with when I was in my early 20s. That has still been a beacon, even when I forgot about it. That was God's voice, because it's not always the audible. We look for the audible. We look for the tangible. When God speaks in so many things, yes, sometimes God will send us a burning bush. But what all had to happen for Moses to get to a burning bush? Lots of distractions, lots of running. Yes, absolutely, very good. And so we are given, through Samuel, in this very sort of innocence, a reminder of how simple God is when God's trying to get to us, if we can get quiet. Now, we live in a world where attention has become an economic tool. People have talked a lot about the attention economy, that your attention is currency. We see that a lot with how the news flows now, social media, that we get these things so much more rapidly. We're constantly engaged, chronically online. I am totally one of those people who are chronically online, even though I don't like to be. And because of that, we've seen there have been scientific reports, all of the things telling us that our attention spans, trash. We have the attention span of a gnat, right? Because we get things so quickly. So to ask somebody to go sit still, oof. Right? But this is probably why people like me wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning, because that's the only time things get quiet, right? It's the only time I'm not to-do list, working on a thing, preparing the lectures, answering emails, doing the research, talking to the people, scrolling. And God is inviting us back to the basics. Something real simple, but so hard at the same time, and that is, gotta get still. Go to the place where my presence lives and answer when I call you. What is the persistent thing that I'm calling you? What is moving you that you are not responding to? This is the question that I feel like is really prescient in this. And so I was reading This Here Flesh by Cole Arthur Riley, and she talks about this idea of contemplative spirituality and says that most simply is a fidelity to beholding the divine in all beings. And I would nuance this and say, in our stillness, it invites us to also behold the divine that is calling from within us. Because, and we haven't gotten here yet in the Bible at least, but we all are benefiting from the Emmanuel, the God with us, and the God within us, because we all started as a piece of the divine. That when God has, and this is God's track record, right? God is very good at moving about in the silence. When God created the earth, God moved on it and spoke to it. When God said, I'm lonely, and I get this from James Weldon Johnson's interpretation of the creation. And God steps out onto the cosmos and says, you know what, I'm lonely. So God creates all these things. And then it's like, this is cool, I like this, I ate that up. Still kind of lonely. And then what does God do? God takes a piece of God's self, creates out of God's creation, because the earth is God's creation. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And we're part of that, right? So God takes part of God's creation and forms. And then God speaks God's breath into us. So we not only are bowing to the divine in us, but the divine with us, which is what Jesus reminds us, right? And so Riley also says that in this moment that Eli and Samuel are having, she suggests that Eli is also asking Samuel, what do you hear? What do you hear? Because the assumption is when someone is calling you that you can't readily identify, you go for the nearest person in your vicinity. I've done it before. I think I heard something, I go to my mom and be like, you called me? What'd you say? And she's like, that's not me. Because it wasn't coming from outside of me. But the echo feels like it's external, right? And so it is a suggestion that I would like to nuance and say that Eli is asking not only what do you hear, but who is calling? Because it's not me. We come to church every day. Y'all are not coming to hear the preacher. You're coming to hear God, which means that something is resonating in you that you're trying to get an affirmation of, right? And so the question is that I'd like to raise for you to think about is, when and where do you actually hear God? What does God sound like? Who is the voice? Are you looking for it outside of yourself when it is really the echo of God inside of you? And so if we take a few lessons, 3 lessons from, I told you I was going to give you 3 points before I get out your way. One is that you must be focused, not on the thing that is just in front of you. You have to be open to the things that are trying to manifest outside of you because they're already inside of you, right? So as Samuel laid in the presence of God, not even really taking much count for it, right? Because he's an intern. He don't know nothing about nothing. He just know he's supposed to sleep in front of the Ark of the Covenant. But he's literally sleeping in the presence of God while God is speaking to him, right? And so we have to think about where the role of distraction is in our interpretation of what is calling us. Because it's easy to find yourself in confusion, right? That as we take in so many things, we wonder, we get anxious. There's a lot of anxiety, right? What do I do? Where is my place? How do I help? And you think that it's a big, huge thing when God is calling you to what makes sense, the next logical thing, which is usually not the big thing, it's the small thing. It's the showing up. It's the giving when you feel the move to. It's the going and voting. It's the speaking truth to power to those around you, right? Because remember that God tells Samuel that what I'm doing in you, through you, will make Israel's ears tingle. Not that you're going to save the whole community, but that by doing what I asked you to do, it's going to have a ripple. It's not the thunderous voice that we look for. God says, I will make their ears tingle when they hear about it, when they hear the word. So Samuel is also giving us the opportunity to reflect on, where is God pushing me to do the small thing that is going to echo past my lips to someone else's ears, right? Next is how we develop our discernment, that we must not only discern the voice, but the message. That two things happen. God calls, but God has a message. That once we discern the voice of God, which it's not one size. It's not the deep timber of the cosmos, something big and large. Sometimes it's the voice of a loved one. Sometimes it's interacting with a child. Sometimes it's the hug from someone who means something to you, right? But again, it is in these spaces of silence, these spaces of stillness, these spaces of softness, where God's voice can ring so clear. And it's usually not complex. God calls us by name. Our call knows us intimately, and it's usually not complex. Now, the road to get there, that's something different. But the call in and of itself, not that hard. So Samuel's experience is reminding us that we have to discern the voice of God, because sometimes we're looking for our master outside of us when we should be resonating with the master that lives within us. And to listen for what the message is. And know that it's going to be a simple thing, something that you could absolutely repeat within a sentence. It's not going to be, do this and this and this and this. No. Go pray for that person. Go read a little more. Go sit with someone. Go give of your time. Right? And then that we must draw near to God in order for that echo to penetrate our consciousness. Samuel was sleeping by the presence of God. He went out to where Eli was. Eli said, go back to where you were. Draw back, draw nearer. There's a hymn that says, nearer, my God, to thee. God is always drawing us into relationship, into closeness with God. And so, where we would go to try to find the things outside of ourselves, God is calling us and saying, I am calling you from the quiet place. Not all the way out there. Come back here. Come back to center. Come back to your center. And we must learn what that means for each and every one of us. But sitting by yourself, sitting with your thoughts, sitting with your anxieties, and waiting for God to show up in the midst of it, that's not easy, right? One thing that Samuel probably had going for him that we don't is Samuel probably was not nearly as anxious as most of us. When I sit down in my prayer time, I'm like, oof, okay. I'm here. And then the monkey brain. I could be doing this. What if I'm doing this? What if I'm not praying right? What if I'm not using the right words? And I am sure God is looking at me like, girl, just take a deep breath, right? And think about when we pray. Think about when we practice the Lectio and all of the other things that we practice in church. What is it getting us to do? Be quiet. Reflect. See what's there on the other side of the static. But you got to let the static fizzle out. You got to take your time. That's why Eli said, go back to sleep. You're doing too much. Go to sleep. I'll suggest to y'all too, maybe we should go to sleep. Take a nap. Find God in the quiet place. And in between your consciousness. Because why do we wake up at 3 and 4 in the morning? Because our consciousness is not in the driver's seat. And maybe that is the quiet place where God is saying, hey, give me 5 minutes so I can speak a word that's already in you. Let it echo through you. So thankfully, unlike Samuel, and unlike Samuel's time, we don't have the Ark of the Covenant. God's presence is not held in one place. God saw to that once we get to the New Testament. God rips the veil in half in the temple. And if we trust Mark's version of the New Testament, God also rips the seams of heaven to say, I will not be far from you. I will be close to you. This is where we get the God with us in print. But God started here. God started in the garden. God has always found us in silence and called to us by name. Has set out a call, a purpose for us by name. And it's not nebulous. He named us and God named us. God names the thing. And Samuel is reminding us that we must go back to the presence of God, take a rest, and see what is echoing within us. And that this is also an echo of prayers beyond Samuel, right? That this is God answering Hannah. Because Hannah went to the temple, weeping and wailing, hooting and hollering. And God heard her and said, okay. Now God is saying, no, I really heard you. I am going to call this child. So God is saying to us, as I close, that if you find me in the quiet place, I am already calling you. I'm waiting for you at the door. And God waits for us at the door to our heart every day. And maybe God is calling you today, right now, to recommit yourself to God, to your purpose, to bowing to the divine that is already in you. Because God is already with us. God tore the veil in half to get close to you. And God tells us through a child who didn't have our anxieties, who didn't know how to be a priest, who was still an intern. How much more does he speak to us, inexperienced, in our anxieties, in our cacophony, in our monkey brain, and is yet and persistently calling us by name.